Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running virtual roundtable, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and the science of the stuff that we are putting on our feet. Today, we have the normal crew. We have myself, Dr. Matthew Klein, who is clean-shaven, by the way, for the listeners. We chopped off the beard. Nathan was not able to make it tonight. He is suffering from heartbreak, as earlier today, the Milwaukee Bucks were eliminated from the NBA playoffs. So, big news. But yeah, we also have a very special guest on the podcast today. We are very excited to have Mike Coe on. Most of you probably know him as Kofuzi. Very popular YouTube channel, just cracked 100,000 subscribers. We're very excited to have you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
I think popular might be an understatement here, but we'll go.
Yeah, and we'll go into a bunch of things in a little bit, but just on the docket for today, as far as our larger discussion and podcast, going to get to know Mike a little bit, success about growing his audience, his vision for his work, and we're also going to discuss a little bit, we got to keep it shoe related, right? So we're going to take a look at forefoots today specifically, the differences between rigid and flexible forefoots and what that actually means, biomechanical implications, and why one runner may be suited for a flexible forefoot versus a rigid forefoot. So that's also going to be our subjective portion for today. The subjective will be, do you prefer a flexible or a rigid forefoot? Why and for what purposes? So as we move forward, we're going to interview Mike here. So I'm going to give him his nice little hype intro here. Mike Coe is a non-elite runner who loves running shoes and making videos. Not particularly fast, but he does get lost easily. He is always up for a new adventure. So thanks for coming on again. And yeah, I mean, obviously you have a very successful channel and things have been going pretty well. I'm a subscriber. I watch most of your videos that come out as well. What was your inspiration for starting the channel you have?
Well, I mean, I think that it was a creative outlet, and it didn't start out as like running shoes. It started out as just kind of like I wanted to make videos, and so it was more of a daily vlog, just general family life. And then as I was making the videos and I was having fun doing that, you start thinking about like, well, if I'm going to go through all this trouble, having 6 subscribers isn't awesome. So the whole point of it was to share. So it's like then you start looking into like, well, how do I get more people to watch these? And you start thinking about points of view and what is your channel about, rather than just kind of like making whatever you feel like. And so eventually it kind of took a couple of different permutations. It was originally like an urban dad vlog. Like I'm in Chicago and me and my buddies were all like pretty involved dads. And so I felt like that was maybe a point of view that was not really well expressed on YouTube. So I thought about that for a little while, but then I didn't love like filming my kids all the time and always having it at like all the family functions and stuff. So it eventually started to pivot, and it was like, well, how can I still make videos regularly and kind of have the fun of like trying to express an idea, but also like the enjoyment of having like deadlines. And I mean, it's weird that that's fun, but in a sense, like that made like it like more like, you know, fun, like objectives to accomplish, you know, like I would love things that are gamified. So like, it was like, all right, how do I make sure I'm still making stuff on a regular basis? And then how do I make this thing grow? All that stuff kind of like fed into it. And running was something where it was kind of like, well, this is becoming, you know, I've been on and off on running throughout my life. And it was kind of in an on phase as I was like learning about things like run tracking and stuff. So I was like, all right, this is kind of a nice way to get back into fitness again. And so it just kind of went from there. And those videos kind of like, I wouldn't say took off, but those were the ones that were starting to get some traction. And so it kind of just followed that for a little bit. And it kind of just, you know, kept growing from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's been cool to just see that progression over the years. I mean, just as a fan and a viewer and just kind of passively watching. And then like, it's funny because you have a certain style to your videos as well. And every once in a while in the morning, I'll be making coffee, or I just finished my run, or I'm making breakfast, and I'll have your videos on. And like even my girlfriend knows, like in the background, like, oh, is that a Kofuzi video? You're like, yeah, it is. Yeah.
You've got a unique style. It's like, I think ever since early on, when we first watching, it was like just your camera angles and how you set everything up. It's very unique to you, and it's very well done. It looks like it's real, obviously like very well planned, very well set up, and it's been very unique.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that well thought out. So, like,
Really?
I get lucky with it a lot in camera. I mean, like, now there's more of like a format for like running shoe
Right.
videos and stuff. But like, it just kind of started out with I was shooting what I could with what I had, you know, and it was just like my first like camera that I shot with was my like Moto G. Like, I don't know if you guys even remember that phone, but like, that was the first phone. That was the first video that were made with that. And then like a couple weeks, maybe a couple months later, then I bought like a refurbished GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black, like on Amazon, you know, and that like kind of was like a new thing. And then, you know, just kind of keep adding pieces here and there. And you're like, oh, I know what I could do with this, you know, and you're kind of just play around with it. And then eventually it kind of like the cameras kept getting a lot better. And so it didn't look like a dude who was filming himself anymore, and like it started to look like, you know, someone was filming me in some senses, and in some ways it was better than if someone was filming me, because I could get closer to me without like running into me. You know, I feel like I'm closer than a camera person would be like kind of comfortable getting in a lot of ways, especially with some of the spin around angles. And so I just kind of like really enjoyed like playing around with those camera angles and had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of stuff that like didn't work, you know, that just never gets seen, but that was all part of the fun, is to like, all right, today's run. It made a lot of like really easy running much more interesting, because I was like, all right, today I'm going to take this thing and like whip it around my head if I have some space on the path today, you know? And so you just kind of do that and see what it looks like later, you know? And sometimes it looks great, and then you start using that, and that's in the repertoire now. And sometimes you're like, yeah, that didn't work, and you just move on.
So a lot of this is obviously experimentation, going what worked, what's sticking, what doesn't, and being able to be okay with making mistakes and go, ooh, all right, not doing that again. But yeah, that's definitely has paid off. I mean, it throughout this has looked like, wow, he really knows what he's doing. I honestly thought that you were a like full-time professional before I learned that you were actually, correct me if I'm wrong, a lawyer who was now doing this as a creative outlet and then actually moved into doing this full-time. That was, am I correct on that?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So, I mean, so I went to law school, and then I was kind of like law adjacent in terms of what I did for work. So I was in the litigation space, but I was in the consulting role. And so like, that's a very like one kind of thinking and one kind of work and one kind of creativity there that I did really enjoy. But like, you know, like I've always had like something else that I do that is very different than kind of like the main thing that I do. And so I just had this outlet, and it was a way of kind of just playing around. And in that other line of work, I was doing a lot of editing. We were like working with trials, and I would have to like edit video depositions and stuff like that. And so I already kind of knew how to like do very basic editing. And I was like, you know, on the plus side, or like I rationalized it, on the plus side, I'm getting really good at editing things very fast. And so I was like, yeah, so it's like kind of like work training, you know, so that's good. Yeah. It's not that bad that I'm spending so much time doing this. And then eventually just kind of took over.
That's awesome. That's good. So and you did, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I may have misheard, but you did medical litigation, correct? Is that right?
All kinds. I did. Okay. That was a bulk of it. There's a lot of med-mal litigation. Okay. So that was that. But I also did like commercial litigation, a lot of IP work as well. So like basically when attorneys needed help in a courtroom, you know, that's kind of when they would call me. So like 100% of my work involved like trials.
Got it. So basically what it comes down to is outside of the running shoe world, David or I would not want to see you in court, right? That would be a bad thing.
Unless I'm on your team.
I was going to make that joke. I was going to like, remind
sorry,
me
David.
to never encounter you like outside of this setting.
I'm just joking. I think David probably would have set that joke up better, but oh well. All right, we can get that out of the way. Sorry.
Oh, it's all good. I mean, it's pretty amazing how things work out, right? Like this organic buildup, even with Doctors of Running, and how things have sprouted and just grown. And there's like little bits and components that end up culminating and creating something, you know, which is pretty cool. And I guess that leads me into the next transition here, specifically about your channel. I mean, you come off as very organic and very genuine, and it's something that I definitely appreciate.
Sorry, I lost you a little bit on that question. You got something about, especially on the channel.
Yeah, I mean, you come off very organic and genuine, and it's something that is nice to see, and I think it's also a culmination of the work that you've put in and how your channel has grown. And obviously you hit a very massive milestone recently. You hit 100,000 subscribers, which is huge. That's awesome. What does that mean for you? And what does it look like getting there? Where do you want to go from here? Like, this is, yeah.
I mean, it's a huge milestone. It's something that I never thought I would do, and like in running, like when making videos, you kind of set goals and you think about goals, and then you think about like the next 2 or 3 reach goals. And you're like, I don't know, if I ever get that, I could pretty much just hang it up. Like one of my first like reach goals for distance running was like, if I can ever get under 2 hours in a half marathon, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'll have achieved everything in running that I will ever want to achieve. And then I'll probably hang it up. Maybe I'll start riding my bike more, and then you do it. And then you're like, oh, I can keep going, And so like the 100,000 subscriber mark, when I'm at like 15 or 20,000, you're like, I can't even imagine that. That's like, at the time when I was at 15,000, there weren't that many people in the running space that were at 100,000. Just so it was hard to even conceive, because you're like, I don't think this niche of the YouTube space has that many people that would want to watch that. And now there's multiple people that are at that level. And so it's interesting to kind of have ridden that wave where like running and YouTube like got a lot more popular in a very short amount of time. And getting here was kind of like, I actually had a phone call recently with Ben Parks, who recently just had got to the 100,000 mark as well. We got it like the same week. And it's kind of like, when it's far away, you look forward to it and you imagine what it's going to feel like. And then once you get close enough, it's kind of like, it's another day. So it's a weird kind of combination of feelings where it's like amazing and like, wow, at the same time. You don't want to be ungrateful, but it's like, you've been working at it for so long, and it's been a goal that seems unattainable for so long that sometimes you don't even think about it. So it's like, it's weird and very, very surreal.
This is a very open question on this. I'm curious because obviously a lot of this goes into your hard work. You have put day in and day out, putting videos, doing the work. There's consistency that's necessary. But you also mentioned there's a wave, right? Where, not too long ago, there really was this space didn't exist, or at least maybe I wasn't aware of it. You mentioned there was a wave. What do you think contributed to that wave? Outside of, for you, obviously the hard work and consistency.
I think the big thing about it was that, there's a couple of things, and I think there's maybe like kind of 2 waves to it. But one big thing was that more people kind of like my age started watching YouTube, which wasn't always a thing. Like if you go back like to say like 2008 when I graduated from law school, like people my age weren't watching YouTube at the time was like 3-minute long South Park clips. Right. And you have to watch 10 of them to get the episode. Right. So like that's what YouTube was. It made no sense. And people weren't going there for running content. But people like Ginger Runner were paving the way and making a lot of trail running videos, which were amazing. But I'm not much of a trail runner. I just don't have access to that kind of space. And so like I was watching tons of trail running videos just because I was starved for trail running for running content. And so after a while, you're like, well, I've been running a lot, and I love watching these trail running videos, but I don't trail run, but I run by the lake a lot. So it's kind of like put them together. So, and that's how like it kind of eventually kind of gets there. So one of those is that like a lot of people my age were kind of all starting to look for that kind of content online. And I think there was a lot of really great written stuff that was out there too, but there wasn't a ton of video stuff. But I think that there was a demand. And so I was able to kind of capitalize on that. I wasn't the first one, nor was I the only one, but I was one of like a handful of people that were kind of like, all right, this is a good time to kind of like go deep on this subject of road running and road shoes, because there were some people out there, but certainly not enough to satiate an appetite. I think another part of that too is I suspect, and I haven't spent enough time in Europe to really be certain about it, But I think in Europe, they're run crazy in a different way than we are here in the US. And I think that their television viewing habits are very different. So like, again, people in my age demographic are more likely to watch and search for stuff on YouTube, or they were, say, 5 years ago. And so I think that also had a big part of it too, because early on, a lot of my viewers were from abroad. And it's changed a little bit now as I've gotten bigger, more people in the US, Canada, Australia, England. But early on, it was a lot of Europe. And I think it's because like they're just used to looking for stuff on YouTube over there.
Got it. And so you were
It's
just
really
in,
interesting.
You were just in Spain, right, for ASIC's event, right? So that must have been interesting, kind of obviously meet a lot of those individuals in person. So
yeah, it was super fun. And you know, whenever I go to events, it's always like going to like a Comic-Con kind of convention where it's like all these things that I've seen on TV or on my phone or tablet or whatever, like are in person and in real life, you know? And so like everyone from like other YouTubers that I follow to people on Instagram that I follow that I maybe have not spoken to, like even in like direct messaging or anything, but have interacted maybe in comments and stuff. You meet them in person, and that's super fun. And then like also getting to meet athletes, people that, you know, I really have no business like interviewing. All of a sudden I'm sitting down and I get to ask a few questions. And so it's like, this is super fun. This is super weird. I don't really understand how I got here, but I'm just going to like keep pretending like I belong here, and we'll keep going. And, you know, hopefully the video will be good at the end of the day.
I'm curious why you say why you're like questioning why you're there. I mean, like, because at the couple athlete interviews I saw, I was like, you're doing a great job, you know, and that's part of the learning process. Going, how do I interview this group versus another group? But I thought it was great.
I mean, my approach. I think I have the footage of it somewhere, but it never makes the video. Like pretty much every time I sit down with an athlete that I've never met before, I'm like, at an event like that where they sat with different groups of people like all day long. Right. And it's kind of like what I imagine like a movie premiere kind of thing is, where you just like, you sit down with different journalists and like you get asked the same 6 questions over and over again. And so I would just sit down and be like, hey, I'm a big fan of following you on Instagram and following your career. I'm not a real journalist, so I'm not going to ask real questions. So, and then after that, I start to ask like the 17 magazine questions, like, so tell me, what's your favorite food? What do you like to eat when you're traveling? You know, I mean, fortunately, like for runners, that's really relevant and relatable kind of stuff.
Right.
But like, if you take a zoom out a level on that, it's like straight up like Teen Beat magazine questions. Like, what do you like to wear when you're not working? You know, like, tell me about like your sleep and your, you know, and your recovery habits. Like, those are like really basic questions, but like, you don't get that a lot from a lot of the pros. 'Cause it's always like, you know, tell me what happened on the 4th lap, you know, when the mood happened. How did you think about when you were going to cover it? You know, or how did you decide to stay back? You know, like that's a very like deep question in terms of like track strategy or whatever. But like, I don't really care about that as much, to be honest. But I'd rather know more about the athlete. You know, I want to know what makes them tick. I want to know like what their favorite like casual shoe is when they're traveling. You know, like, because I like the shoes aspect of it. But I also train myself, and so like I want to know what they're training like if they come from a different country and they're on a different continent now, like what are you eating? What are you even looking for? Did you bring snacks? Like how does that even work? So like those are the kinds of things that I like, and I like to think that the athletes appreciate it. I hope they don't think like, who is that weirdo? But who was like that weirdo American, which is certainly possible, but I like to think of it as like I really want to get to know like the person more than the stats. So that's kind of like been my approach in interviewing people.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I'm like just trying to soak it all in like a sponge here. And from a lot of the things that I'm hearing, I mean, it sounds like you're speaking a lot about community, run culture as a whole, the individual person within that community, and then a deeper appreciation for shoes. And so
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and like bridging all this together, I mean, I've got so many questions, and I will try to like streamline this as best as I can. But when we're talking about culture, I think there's been a lot of growth in the sport, and I think from the European standpoint, what you brought up was very interesting, that this lane of trail running specifically has brought on a lot of different running documentaries, a lot of different access to the sport, and just things to watch. And when I think about it, that's a lot of what I've watched. And I'm not even a trail runner either. I've run a couple trail races, but I don't necessarily identify myself as a trail runner. You have found this lane in this, it's a pretty specific niche, but you've done a very good job of really blowing it up. And I'm going to say this in like the words that you use. So like the non-elite space, the road running space, and this larger community. And so as far as running culture coverage across all platforms, not necessarily just yourself, but do you feel that running culture as itself and media coverage for it, is it going in the right direction? And then on top of that, if we want to relay some shoe stuff into this, what goes into good shoe content? Like what goes into a good review? What are some things that you're looking for? And some just all around, what makes good shoe content? So I know I just asked you a boatload of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'll start at the top because like I think that there's two very different things there. Like the running culture coverage and like media coverage are very, very different. And I think that running culture, you know, I mean, taking myself out of it because I'm biased on my own work, but like I think running culture coverage is doing a great job right now, right? Because we're getting more insight into the athletes than ever. I mean, we're from everything from Strava to TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Like we're learning more about athletes and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis than I think we've ever had access to before. And even just in addition to the athletes, just like what are running clubs doing? You know, like you had to be a really special kind of running nerd, like back in like the 90s when I had like a Runner's World subscription in high school to know about a running club that wasn't in your town. Like that would have been unheard of. Like, how did you even know about that if you didn't have like a buddy that just moved from LA? But I know about like Good Vibes Track Club, and I know people over there. And I could go to a city and find a run club if I wanted some help in finding some good routes. You know, like there's stuff everywhere. In Chicago, there's like so many different run clubs here too. And I think that they're each doing a really good job of telling their own stories, especially in that non-elite space where people are working hard, and that's what connects us all and in this sport. And I mean, it's not like everyone has to be driven to get PRs. It's not like run clubs are PR driven. Run clubs are like community driven and like showing up driven. And the PRs just come as a result of that. And that's what's beautiful about running is just if you keep chipping away at it, good things will happen. And if like fast times don't happen, good times will happen. So like, you know, that's a great thing about the sport. And I think that running culture coverage is great right now. Running like media coverage from like traditional like sports sense, I think has to really figure out like how to cover the sport a little bit better. Like, cause like the Olympics are great and Olympic coverage is great. And like the background stories are also great, but like throwing in the background stories, like in the middle of a 10,000 meters is like super annoying. Cause like, that's where the fun stuff, like you'll see the pack.
I agree completely.
And then it'll go to commercial. And then now there's 3 separate packs. And I'm like, how did that happen? That's the important part. Like, I don't understand that. Or like when you like watch the marathon and they cut away when they're going to the water tables, like, no, that's like a pit stop at like a NASCAR race. Like you don't go to commercial when everyone's hitting the pit stops. So it's like, I don't, I think there just needs to be some, like it's 2022. We should be able to look at like Michael J. Fox and Back to the Future 2 and see like 17 different angles of a race and pick whichever 4 we want to see at the same time. Do I want to watch a chase pack? Do I want to watch a lead pack? Do I want to follow top Americans? Do I, like I should be able to do that. I'm not saying it's going to be cheap or easy, but I feel like, if they really wanted to cover the sport for enthusiasts or even to get, casual observers to be interested in it from a spectator perspective, some of those things have to change, so
totally. Yeah, you're speaking my language here. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is watching a track meet and the 5,000 or 10,000 is going on, and then they put a still frame and they're filming like the steeple water pit or something like that. Yeah. And it's just sitting there and you just see bodies running by and you're like, why aren't you covering the actual race? And they're just talking about like, we're going to cut to commercial break and talk about like whatever, like look forward to these people in the next events. So I think that's great. And like having that access to view different to different athletes in different parts of the race and seeing those important breaks and things like that. What's up, Matt?
It sounds like, Kofuzi, what you're saying is there's a lot of stories that go on. Most people, when they might stereotype, a race is going, it's just, the runners, you're focusing on the front. But there's a lot of different stories. And you just mentioned, there's front pack, there's a middle pack, might be top American, top European. Everybody wants to see these different stories. And what I think I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is there needs to be better coverage of these different stories. Because that's what's going to create more excitement, is getting into the individual instead of just looking at the lead pack going, what's happening throughout this whole thing? And there's also, for those of us who are non-elite, those are, we want to learn from elite runners going, what are you doing at the pit, at the water stops, right? How are you grabbing those bottles? What's happening? Is there drama happening as you drop your bottle, right? That's going to create more excitement. But it sounds like that hasn't been done yet, but needs to happen. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I think because there's always that debate of like, should we care about First American, right? Like when you're looking at marathons, and I think that you gotta. I mean, in a way, you kind of have to think about it. And like, if you were at like a degenerate gambler at a horse track, there's really like 7 different things happening in the same race, right? So you might care about the winner. You might not care because you got a trifecta going on or something. Like you might have all sorts of different weird bets going on where you care about certain things, but you need to see the race. And I'm not saying like we need to introduce gambling into professional running. That's I guess a different perspective, but
different
like,
story. Yeah.
In every race, it's not like baseball where you're watching the ball and will it or will it not get hit. There's like 15 different things happening simultaneously. And there's multiple different storylines to track at the exact same time. So there's like a little bit of chaos in a running race. And I feel like the media's job is to distill those stories better than who came in first, second, or third. I think that's kind of like the main thing that I'm trying to emphasize.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like when you're watching a mass media coverage of a major marathon or track race, a lot of times when those stories do get told, it's when things go wrong from the people up front. Mm-hmm. And you're taking a favorite, like let's say Donovan Brazier at the U.S. Olympic trials in the 800, and he's running with a hamstring injury. He tries to kick, can't kick. They're talking more about Brazier falling off of the pace than who's actually performing and the rest of the group coming through. And so I think that's a very good acknowledgement of some of the stuff that's going on. Like some of these stories are getting lost because they're focusing on figureheads and then deciding to create their media space based on a couple individuals rather than a larger picture. But I think it's really interesting, some of the stuff that you've brought up, and like as far as media coverage and running culture. And I think something that's new to the media space now is that athletes can have an individual voice. And I think about a lot of these different running athletes specifically creating content. Clayton Murphy, who was an Olympic 800-meter runner for the U.S. and 142, I believe, PR. Like, he has his own YouTube channel, I believe. Paul Chalimo started his own YouTube channel. Like, a lot of these people are creating their own YouTube channels and or podcasts. And, like, one of the ones that's outside of running, but, like, I think of, like, Draymond Green. I'm a Golden State Warriors fan. So, like, Golden State will go and play a NBA playoffs game. He goes back to the hotel room and he goes and records his live podcast of all of the things that he's thinking about and doing. And the fact that like this athlete space where people can go and voice all of those things that we're talking about outside of a formal questioning environment, like say in a press conference where it's like, what were you thinking in lap 4? Like you had said earlier, they can go and like lay out whatever they felt or think and do things like that. And I think that's also contributing to this larger topic as a running media as a whole. And I think it's interesting to see too, because like there's so many different lanes and people opening it up. I don't know if you follow New Generation Track and Field as well, but they are speaking to the youth, whether it's high school or collegiate, and it's almost like they're making it cool to run fast. You know what I mean? Like it's you train,
I mean,
you keep growing.
I love what those guys are doing. I'm not like, I don't think I'm the target demographic as like a 42-year-old dad with 2 daughters, but like, I absolutely love that they're in the space and they're getting people excited about track and field. Like, I mean, it wasn't a cool sport to do when I was in high school, and so like to have like this notion that like, kids at that age are like thinking that track athletes are cool, or track athletes are someone to look up to and emulate. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, I grew up at the time of Dan and Dave, and I was a pole vaulter in high school. So like those were like the people that I knew, and like I knew like Sergey Bubka stories, but that's like about it, you know? So, I mean, the idea that like kids are like telling like the legend of like Galen Rupp, you know, as they're coming through as like sophomores in high school is like, I think pretty wild. And like, I think it's people like New Generation who I don't always understand what they're doing, but I know that it's good content. And you know good content when you see it.
Does anybody understand what like an 18-year-old with the video is doing?
Yeah, like I couldn't make that content because it's not my demographic and that's not my lifestyle. But they're telling their running stories in their own language, and I think it's absolutely amazing. So like there's so much room and space for that kind of storytelling, even if it doesn't, like, even if it's not something that I'm going to like have a notification bell on for, I'm very happy that it exists and that it's here.
I agree completely. And like, I feel like it seconds a lot of the messages that you have been portraying throughout this podcast, is that finding, let's just say a lane, but like someone who goes and tells their individual and or group story. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this, is like finding the stories that come along with this and creating an experience, and it will speak to someone bigger than just themselves. And so I think you've done a great job with creating a very good, strong, diverse community, and people, you're very relatable. You're a very nice individual and someone I'm happy to follow. So I think you've been doing a great job. And I think that leads me to kind of like the final question with you here. Like, I mean, where are you hoping to go with your work? Like, what are you trying to create? What is your vision for all of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's something I think about all the time. You know, like on the one hand, I don't want to be like, all right, I made shoe review videos for 2 years, and like now I'm big enough that I don't have to do that anymore. And so here's what I really want to do. There's a lot of people doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that's not like kind of like, I don't consider like the shoe reviews as like, you know, like paying my dues. I like making shoe review videos. I think that they're a lot of fun. I like the format. I like trying new shoes. That's always been kind of like a core part of my running experience. And as it grows, I get to try more and more. And so the sad thing is I don't get to spend as much time with like any one individual shoe anymore. So it's kind of like, you know, I'm a victim of my own success in a lot of ways. But like one of the things that I, you know, like people are like, you know, are you going to start making documentaries? And I'm like, I don't think I have enough to say to fill up like, you know, an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes for like a full length movie. Like I don't know what story I want to tell, you know? And so like, I think about like, so where does that leave me? I still experiment on the YouTube channel a lot. I like making kind of like run motivational videos, or just, I mean, I just like running footage, and I like putting running footage to music. And so like, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. The views aren't great, but I really enjoy making that. So like, I always kind of chase like, what am I having a lot of fun making, right? And so that's kind of the thing that I'm always kind of like trying to like center myself towards, is like, if I'm making something new, like, do I like it? If I'm making something that I've made before, do I like it? Yeah, if the answer is yeah, then okay. The views might not be there, but the other videos will have views, and it all kind of averages out. Going forward, one of the things that I think is a little bit more ambitious for me, but I'll kind of circle back to kind of like the limit of that ambition. But one of the things that like I kind of want to do that's a little bit more ambitious is tell more like running adventure stories. So like experiencing like bucket list races. Like, what are some of the best like non-major marathons in the US? I want to go run them all. What are the weird distance races that have lots of history that, again, like you might have only read about this. Maybe if you were a Runner's World subscriber, you probably weren't a nerd enough to read about it. But if you were like super deep into running magazines in the 90s, maybe you heard about, you know, Falmouth Road Race. Maybe you heard about some of these other things all over the country that like have been around for decades and exist because two dudes got drunk one day and challenged each other to a foot race from this bar to the other one on the other side of town. You know, I feel I like things like that are fun, and I want to kind of spotlight those things because there's community and tradition and history around all of those. And I just think that like it's a way to kind of like spotlight what's already been happening and what are the new kind of like variations that are happening and building on top of that as we go forward in time. So I want to tell more like running event stories for now. I mean, maybe that changes into something else, like me creating my own running adventures later. But for now, like, what are the big races that like maybe people have heard about? Maybe, but really they know about. Like, you know, I got to run the Cherry Blossom 10 mile recently, and that's one that was just super fun, a lot of fun, and I had no idea that it was such a big deal. And so it was super cool to be able to see it, experience it, and then to share it. And so, like, one of the limits on that, though, is like I had a business, and I shut it down during the pandemic, you know, and I had employees that I had to let go, and that super sucked. You know, it's a terrible feeling, and I lost a lot of money during the time. So there's a lot of risk. You know, you don't really anticipate like, you know, courtroom shutting down because of the pandemic type of risk, but you know, there's always that kind of risk in, you know, building a bigger and bigger enterprise. So I feel like right now we're at a time where most YouTubers are like creating bigger and bigger teams, and they want to hire the video editor, the sound engineer, and all these people. And I think that's great for lots of teams. But for me, that's kind of my check. I'm a one-person operation now, and I kind of like every time I'm like, well, I'm going to really need some more people to be able to do that. Then I'm kind of like, yeah, I can maybe save that for another day, or partner with a brand that has some horsepower and manpower that they can help me kind of pull off some of these things that I want to do. Like having like super big shakeout runs with like custom printed t-shirts available. Like that's something that I don't want to logistically set up. I don't want to have to worry about it. I don't want to have to think about it. But if I could have, you know, some brand support, you know, and make that happen, because that's a fun thing for the Kofuzi Run Club, then it's something that I'll do. But, you know, like what I can personally handle by myself is usually a good barometer for like, maybe that's too big of an idea for right now. So
I like that. I like that you have like this checks and balance system on yourself, and you keep it very pure, and it's something that's very important to you, and that you do things that are fun, that are enjoyable, and are stories that you want to tell. It's funny that you bring that up about these unique races, because I believe it was today. It was either today or yesterday. It was Beta Breakers just happened up in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's another one where it's just like that's a super goofy race, and like that's got to be a ton of fun, right? I've never done it.
Totally. Like, you get the centipedes and people running and like throwing tortillas in the air, and like there's just so many of these kooky races out there, and I would like to watch that content. I think that would be a great story to tell. There's plenty of those types of races in the country, and I think it's just, I'm all for it. So if you want to go for that, I'll sit on the couch and I'll watch it.
Awesome. Cool.
I'm going
Thank
to
you.
throw out a reference that hopefully everybody gets, but I feel like a lot of these races that you're talking about, if you're reading Runner's World, that wouldn't get you enough. But if you're going to read stuff like Running Times, maybe you might get there. And hopefully somebody, rest in peace, but hopefully, what do you think? Is that true or not true?
Yeah, I think like there's certain things that only get written about in like super ultra specific running magazine, or like back in the day they did. I mean, now it might be like on a subreddit. I mean, I don't really know what that is, but you know, I think that's kind of where you might find those kinds of things. But hopefully, you know, those things will get more attention as more people are running and making videos about what they know and what they're doing, you know, and so that way, that's how I'll be able to find it, is because some random person will make a video about some race somewhere in the country, or maybe over in Europe somewhere, or who knows where, that has like a bunch of history. Like have you seen those videos? There's this one video in Italy. It's like a cross country race where it literally runs through like a really old little Italian town, and you got to run through like a house. Like
yes, I've seen those.
Actually,
I don't know what those are.
Yeah,
but
how do we all three of us know about that, right? But because of social media, we do, and now we all want to run it somehow. So like, I'm pretty sure that race does not have a brand sponsor. So like, I can't be like, you know, New Balance, send me over there. But like, you know, I'd love to go run that kind of race, you know? And so like, those are the kinds of experiences that I'm kind of like looking for, and that I'm really kind of chasing right now. And those are so far the stories that I want to tell. And right now they're very me centric. It's me running the race or me watching the race, but maybe that'll change, but maybe it won't. And maybe people will be happy enough to kind of come along, whether I'm participating or spectating. But those are the kinds of stories that I think are just super fun.
I agree completely, and I'll be here to view it and watch it. And I think it's so awesome. I love that we all knew, like exactly like you said. Like, there's these races that just go through houses and just do these weird things. Like even in like the mountain biking world, that exists. Like there's this like urban downhill. Like you're gonna go down these stairs, through this hallway, through this house, like down out this driveway, and all these weird combinations. But yeah. Thankfully, today we do have a sponsor for this episode, so I do want to express some appreciation for that. This episode today is sponsored by Running Warehouse. Right now, there are some Memorial Day promotions going on with discounts on many types of products through the end of May. Make sure you check it out. Also coming soon, Running Warehouse will have the ASICS Metaspeed Sky and Edge Plus. So not the original version, but the new update to the stuff that we saw down at their most recent event, with a lot of PRs, Eilish McColgan running very fast, and a lot of other types of ASICS athletes killing it. That'll come out on June 1st. We'll be testing out these and putting out full reviews on these models soon. Nathan, who couldn't make it today, did want to put a little plug in there as well, that he also purchased some portable water bottles and rabbit half types from Running Warehouse as well. And check out runningwarehouse.com to see their full inventory and to get ready for the summer months. So I think that transitions us to the next segment here as well. And so as far as to keep this related about shoes, I know we talked about it a little bit, but we're going to talk about that forefoot mechanics that we talked about earlier. So the rigid versus the flexible forefoot topic. So what is the forefoot? What does rigid and flexible even mean? And what are some examples of each?
So I'm curious, actually, Kofuzi, if and when it comes to, we've talked a little bit about reviewing shoes, and we gotta dig into this, so we'll dig into it more. I'm curious from your perspective, when it comes to the front of the shoe, what do you look for?
It depends on the shoe, right? And so I'm a big proponent of, and I always try to tell this, whenever I meet someone that is a running shoe store, like owner operator, I'm always like, guys, I got your back. I'm trying to tell everybody you got to buy a rotation of shoes, not just one. You don't just get one in the summer, one in the winter. You got to get a bunch, because it's and that usually like gets a good chuckle. But I do think that it's more like kind of like golf clubs in a bag, knives in a drawer. There's different tools for different jobs, and for different tasks you want different things. You know, like a daily trainer is going to get you through most of what you need to do, but you know, if you get into it a little bit more, you might want to add a second or a third type of shoe that does some slightly different things. And so I think in terms of forefoot flexibility or rigidity, I would want it more rigid in a shoe that I'm going to run faster in. And I would want it, the more easy miles I'm going to put on it, kind of the more flexible I want it to be, because I'm not going to be like going through a full range of motion, I think. So like having that shoe to be flexible so I don't have to fight it so much on an easy day is something that I think that I would prefer. I'm trying to think if there's any exceptions to that in some of the shoes that I've looked at recently, but I think they're all pretty flexible up in the forefoot. But you know, I'm not like a shoe bender. I don't do that when I like try the shoes. So like I'll find out once I put it on my feet. You know.
We encourage, one of my pet peeves is having worked in a running store, is when you see people come up to the wall, take the shoe and bend it in half. I'm like, good job, you just created a flex point that was not supposed to be there. But yeah, I'm totally with you. And we saw, and I'm really glad that you did talk about the multiple shoe rotation. We talk here about shoes being tools, right? And there are different tools that work for different things and different tools that work for different people. We also know there's some early evidence actually from one of our other previous interviewees, Laurent Midsole, who actually showed having a couple different shoes may actually decrease your injury risk, because it's kind of like cross training. So I'm really glad you brought that up. When it comes to the forefoot, so that's the front of the shoe, right, where your toes are sitting. For the listeners, right, for listeners, I'm holding up the ASICS Evo Ride 3, which I have really been enjoying. It is a little bit more stiff up front, and different. The front of the shoe will be designed differently, right? So certain people, as Kofuzi mentioned, for an easy day, certain people will like a lot of flexibility up front. If you have that, you're going to need to have enough mobility in your toes so they can extend. And some people, they love that. They want that mobility. Other people, if you're running faster, they may want something more stiff, and that means the shoe's not going to bend. And when you put more force into it, right, it might feel a little bit more snappy. Different people will perceive that. And we just, again, Kofuzi just mentioned something about, hey, you prefer having a stiffer ride when you're running faster, a more flexible ride when you're running slower, just because it feels like, hey, you know, you're not having to fight the shoe as much if you're not going through that full range of motion when you're running a little bit slower trying to recover, right? But different things will happen. You can have different needs, and different people, honestly, may prefer things, and it's really important that people try that out. And that's what's crazy is, again, we're seeing a huge variation now, where even with the max stack height stuff, we're seeing stuff that still flexes quite a bit, and then other stuff that is rigid beyond all belief. It's just interesting to watch that variation.
Yeah, I think that's a very great point too, right? There's like this, the water has been muddied, and there's so many different components that make a shoe what it is. And so it used to be like, okay, so it's a low profile, flat shoe. Like this thing is going to bend all over the place. Like it's a super low, lightweight. You're probably going to race in it. Maybe you can train in it. But now there are so many different things that go into the process of making a shoe. So what are some of the things that make a shoe gain flexibility or rigidity through the forefoot?
So a couple of those things, right? So the most common ones, so flexibility, more flex grooves. Kofuzi, do you notice that there's certain places that you like having a flex groove? Have you noticed that at all? Or is it just kind of like the overall flexibility?
Yeah, I think that a lot of, I mean, kind of, I'm trying to think of like some of the patterns on shoes that I've seen with flex grooves, and not all shoes have them. But usually it's kind of like if there's like a band of two, usually there's one groove like above the pads of the feet and one kind of like below them. Seems to be kind of about where I see them a lot. Like I'm trying to think, I think the 880 had a lot in that kind of, I just ran in that one a couple of days ago.
Example. Yeah.
I feel like that has two flex, and I think the 1080 as well has them in the same spot, where I feel like you've got a thick stack height, but that flex groove helps keep it so that the shoe kind of can roll a little bit more as you're going through the foot strike. And if you're kind of like super easy recovery day shuffling, you might not even notice it, but like, you know, when you're trying to move a little bit quicker in a thicker stack height, I think sometimes that's when it maybe becomes more apparent. I'm not really sure. I haven't thought about it like super intensely. I've never been like, you know, this shoe stinks, but if it had flex grooves, it'd be better. I've never had that kind of like thought. But you know, when I see them, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that helps the shoe move a little bit, so it's not going to be so stiff. So I think I see of it as a plus. Although, you know, there's a lot of shoes that don't have them, and they're good as well.
Still flexible. So there's multiple ways to get flexibility, right? So you can have flex grooves. You can just have a lot of give to the sole as well. There's other companies like this, a softer cushion shoe. Sometimes if the sole is softer, may give a little bit. That's what can provide, and also having a thinner midsole can also provide more flexibility, but things that stiffen it up, so stiffer midsole. So the Evo Ride and some of the recent ASICS stuff is a great example of, there's no plate, but this thing is pretty stiff. There's also a really big, large amount of
I just took that thing out for 18 miles this morning. Yeah,
I'm impressed you did that. That thing gets a little hard for me after about 10 miles, so I'm very impressed watching that. But yeah, so again, just rigidity of the sole can add more stiffness. We're seeing a lot of plates in shoes and training shoes. Kofuzi, I'm curious to know what you think about having plates in trainers. We've gone back and forth on this a bunch, especially in the forefoot, and I can see how it might benefit others, but I don't know. Do you think we really need them in trainers?
I'm not against it. I kind of like the idea, because for me, I'm thinking if you're putting a plate in a shoe that's not a racer, it must be because the foam is super floppy. And I tell people every time I get to talk to a brand, I'm like, break my ankles. Like, make the shoe super squishy. Like, you know, they're not squishy enough. You can make it squishier. You could do it. And if you need to put a plate in to make it happen, let's do it. Because I want like just super squish. I want to run an UFOs basically. You know, like I want to have that kind of like cushion for like a recovery day shoe. I mean, that'd be goofy, right? But like, I don't know why they haven't tried to put a little bit of rubber outsole in. I mean, they make shoes, but so maybe it's just because like people think it's going to be just too squishy to run in. Then put a plate in it, you know, or put in a heel clip. You know, it's just you can put things in there, whether it's like a wave plate or whatever it is, depending on the brand and, you know, what technology they're using.
Oh, man.
Like the Primax, like that's a super squishy shoe. That will break. I love.
Yeah, you love that shoe, didn't you?
Yeah,
that will also break your ankles if you're not careful.
I know. Well, you got to make sure you're running straight, but like no turn. But like that's a fun shoe, and that's what I like. I'd be like, yeah, I mean, really maybe I'm just like a super weird, like, you know, like super decadent. Like, I'm not entertained by these other shoes. Give me something else, you know. But I'm like, just make the shoe break my ankles, like make it that squishy. And then, that's so like when I see a plate in a trainer, I'm like, oh, it's going to be super squishy. I hope, so that's kind of, I get excited. I get excited. Sometimes they're in there and I'm like, I don't understand why it's in here. Like, it doesn't make sense. It seems like having it for the sake of marketing it as having a plate, and I don't get it. But other times, I think it works. So like, I'm not like, I think a lot of people are maybe against plates from like, that only belongs in racers. But I'm like, it's just another way of providing stability to a shoe. And so like you're playing around with densities and firmnesses of foams, figuring out ways to make it so like you can make it super squishy or responsive. Like, so these are just different tools. And like, I don't have a ideological problem with any one of the tools.
It's so nice to hear this, because I feel like we're always like yakking on like the fact like, yes, plates, but for the most part, aren't necessarily going to make you faster. They're really there to stabilize the foam. And I got to give a shout out to Laura Healy, who's doing some awesome research over on the East Coast. They did a study recently where they took the Vaporfly, they cut the plate in half and left the foam there, and the running economy was exactly the same.
Oh,
so it's like, yeah, these plates, right? So they're not bad to have, but yeah, I agree that they're going to stabilize the foam, and some people are going to need them, some people are going to not. It's no different than, some people who weren't necessarily running fast, they just want to run, and they might need a little more stability, and in the old days, we just put a rigid orthotic in their shoe. It's no different. I think people just need to get better at asking, why is this plate in here, and is it appropriate for either me, or is it appropriate for the consumer that we're designing this for? So I appreciate that. And I at first I was exactly what you just said. I was that person who was like, this should only be in racing shoes. Like, coming from the college scene where like you have your racing shoe and you have your training shoe and they're separate. And now we're starting to like blend this together. I'm like, and now the more I know, right, in my profession, I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. You just got to stabilize it. We can stabilize the foot, and we talk about the stability component all the time. So I'm curious, going off of that, what do you think are some benefits of a flexible versus a rigid forefoot?
I just think that it helps the foot roll more. And so like, I think that as some foams are super squishy, they get wide in the base. And I think that if those really wide shoes don't have some way of either rolling through like a rocker, or of rolling through because there's flex grooves or some other way of keeping that midsole flexible, it starts to get a little bit like you're running on paddles, or like you're running in like flippers, like coming out of the beach, and so like the foot still needs to kind of move a little bit. And so like, depending on the size of the midsole, or what the kind of like the gait cycle is going to be like in that shoe, it might need a way of being able to move by flexibility or by geometry, I think.
Right. And I agree on the geometry component. That's where, we talk about all the time, hey, if you've got a really rigid forefoot, you're probably going to need some toe spring, or you're going to need I should say forefoot rocker is the correct term, because you got to be able to transition that through that front of the foot. Normally, if you have this mobility, and not everybody does, that would come from your toes extending, and you need for walking, it's about 60 degrees. Running, actually, you need about like 60, almost 90 degrees of extension, and that's a lot of motion. Not everybody has that. So having a shoe that, if you don't have that motion, you might benefit from a more rigid shoe that has that forefoot rocker for you. Whereas if you have that mobility and you like using it, a more flexible shoe might be better to utilize that, especially if you're somebody who uses more of a foot and ankle strategy, which we talk about all the time, because more forefoot rocker takes a little load off your calf. And actually, we've seen this from some of the diabetic studies, that it actually takes pressure off your forefoot. So if you're somebody that has some issues with like forefoot stress fractures and stuff like that, a rockered shoe, a more rigid one, if it lines up with your foot, might be beneficial. Whereas somebody who goes, I use a lot of my foot and ankle, I like that. I like getting proprioceptive input, or feeling the ground, or feeling myself toe off. You might want some flexibility, but one's not necessarily better than the other. It's really comes down to personal preference. And I guess, yeah, and we're seeing geometry is nuts right now. I feel like that's one of the interesting things where we've gotten, people are still playing with the foams a little bit, but I feel like people are starting to play with geometries, and we're seeing some crazy stuff out there. What kind of interesting geometries have you seen, especially up front, that have been interesting?
I mean, I think that like the idea of the rocker has been kind of like taken it to an extreme. And so some shoes, I feel like I start feeling that rocker like in the middle of the arch, and so to me, it makes the shoe feel really unstable because I feel like you're landing on something that's like kind of moving a little bit. And so I don't love heavily I'm finding that I don't love heavily rockered shoes as much anymore. I'm also finding that like, the brand that I used to associate with rockers was Hoka, and now I don't even feel it like in a Hoka because I think I'm just so used to it in so many shoes, and other brands are like taking it to another level. So I'm just like, oh, this Hoka shoe just feels like a shoe. But like all the shoes kind of feel like that now because it's been successful for them. And so like, I'm starting to think that like maybe for my running style and my cadence or whatever it is, I don't, at least for racing shoes, I don't love heavily rockered shoes. It makes me it makes me feel like I really got to chop up the stride a little bit. It makes the turnover fast, but I feel like I'm running at a pace that I don't want to whenever I'm doing that, unless I'm running like a 5K, then it's fine. But like if I'm trying to do like threshold work or marathon pace or something like that, if it's heavily rockered, unless it's an easy day shoe, but if it's a racing shoe, I feel like I'm off a little bit in them. So that's just kind of one thing that I've noticed. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
It does. It does answer the question.
Observation.
From what I'm hearing, make it as squishy as possible, but do not make it rockered. For the love, no.
Got it.
Yeah,
it's just super flexible, super squishy, but not too rockered.
Yeah. Well,
that makes sense because you liked the RC Elite, correct? Or
that was a great shoe, but like it's also the RC Elite 2 was like a problem of like I got exactly what I wanted and I didn't love it. So it was a great shoe. But like I also didn't feel like I had like the pop that I really am looking for from like a marathon racer. So like I ran CIM in that one because by coming into that race, my feet were like super beat up and I just wanted like something comfortable. Right. But like I also didn't feel like it was the fastest shoe available for me.
I just want to say to you real quick, outside of this entire scope of the podcast, I was at CIM. I knew you were going to be there. I was looking for you.
All right.
Couldn't find you. I was like, no.
It's because I was behind schedule. I was way behind schedule. That's why.
LA was exactly the same thing. I knew you were there, and I was because my wife was running the elite field. I'm like, where is he? I want to be able to say hi, and I totally missed you.
Again, I was behind schedule. That's why.
So how you said you didn't like the well, it didn't work as well as you wanted, but I remember you enjoyed the Metaspeed Sky, correct?
Yeah,
that's a pretty. I mean, that 4-foot rocker is pretty nuts on that.
Yeah,
one.
It is. And I've been running in the Metaspeed Sky Plus, and it's a lot less of a rocker, and I love. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is what I want. This is what I need. So like, it feels like there's a lot more cushion in the 4-foot. And the rocker is not nearly as prominent. Like I don't really even feel a rocker in there. And so I'm like, this is how I like a shoe, So like, and then I went and ran back in the version 1 again. I'm like, oh, this rocker is pretty aggressive. I don't remember it being this aggressive, but it's aggressive. It starts really early,
Yeah, that play is surprisingly aggressive. It doesn't feel like it just standing in it or like running slow, but like once you pick up the pace, man, that thing is snappy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm learning as I go, It's all new data, because it's hard because very rarely do you get to like have pretty much the same, very close to the same shoe with like one or two variables substantially changed. And I feel like with the Metaspeed Sky going from version 1 to the Plus version, like the main difference I'm feeling is where that rocker starts. It also means that there's more like foam further into the 4-foot. And so like I'm liking the more foam and I'm liking that it's less rockered in a race shoe, at least for a marathon. If it was a 10K, 5K, I might still reach for the version 1, but I don't really race those.
Have you run in the Alpha Fly?
It's been a while. I ran in the first, I guess we're still on version 1, but I ran in like the Kipchoge colorway.
Yeah.
I had that one. Love that shoe. It's great.
Okay.
Lots of like soft cushion. It doesn't feel super fast, but like you get to a pace and you just sit there and it's awesome, and you just have a great day. It's a great shoe.
Yeah, because that's the immediate thing I thought of. Stacking up the 4-foot, really kind of like a little bit of a lower drop, but just like the platform sits you up high and you get that sensation. So,
and then like your running mechanics create the drop that you need, not the shoe creating the drop. And I feel like that when you're trying to run fast, I feel like you don't want to rely on the shoe as much for the drop, at least in the way that I run. And that's kind of like, I mean, I don't know. My thought on it might change a year from now, but for right now, I'm like, this was what seems to feel really good for me is when there isn't that much of a drop, but my body position is doing what it needs. So,
yeah. Do you have a question? So to kind of loop it all back to the subjective, I think you've answered a lot of this in the course of the show, but training, we like it squishy, we like it flexible, we like you to do whatever you break your ankles. That's what I got.
Yeah.
So with racing, it almost sounds like it starts to flip a little bit. Like you like it a little bit like stiffer, but still squishy and not quite as rockered. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. What is that, the Takumi-san?
Yeah,
I'm just
so.
wondering.
Lateral cutout.
I'm just wondering.
That's a great. I love that shoe, but I mean, I don't know if there's enough stack in that for me to run a marathon in it. But I love
Yeah.
Doing threshold workouts, even like mile repeats, and then especially 5K pace work, which is absolutely beautiful. It's a great shoe. I really like that one.
Yeah.
And I think that it flips because like I need the shoe to do the job, right? And so it needs to firm up a little bit because I'm hitting the ground harder, I'm pushing the ground off of the ground harder. So there's more force involved. So I think of the foams and shoes like suspension in a car, like a race car suspension would make no sense in like a supermarket parking lot, right? You'd just be like, I feel every single bump and the ride is super uncomfortable. But if you get it into a hard turn on a race course, it just like helps you just like hug the ground and it's doing the exact right thing and it makes the ride feel super smooth while providing the best grip. That's suspension, right? I think kind of the same way for foams, like what's good for a racing shoe foam is going to suck at easy pace. It should, right? I mean, there's a handful of foams that are an exception, but for the most part, it shouldn't be great at that because it should be good at going at the forces required to run at a harder effort. And so like that means generally a bit of a firmer foam. I don't need the rocker as much because, my position is more forward rather than lean back and relaxed. So like I'm getting my body into position to do what it needs. And I need the shoe to kind of, I guess, step out of the way a little bit more. I love having a lot of kind of feedback from the shoe, probably more than most people do. I like to feel the shoe there and feel like it's kind of helping me. But I don't need it to like really be assertive when it comes to the race shoes where I'm like, if it's an easy day shoe, I mean like, hey, if you want to make it feel like it's easier to go for my easy run, great. I don't care. You drive, but, for the racing, I want to drive. So
that's awesome.
I like the driving analogy. Also, that's really good.
Thanks.
Oh, I think it's great. Yeah. Taking like a super car, super shoe, whatever, like just make that analogy. Like you're not going to take a shoe that can go 200 plus miles an hour and drive at 30 miles an hour or less, through recreational driving around the city. Like it's just not going to feel the right way and things are going to be a little bit different. But to also move things along and like loop it back to the subjective as well, like just to go over individual preferences and differences like that. Matt, what's your answer to that question as far as what do you prefer as far as forefoot flexibility, geometry, things like that, like whether it's daily training, whatever. Yeah, like feel free to take it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to share a really overarching thought that I've learned, and I think I've kind of emphasized is needs change over time. And I want to encourage everyone that's listening or viewing is that your body's not going to be the same over time, and you need to be ready for that. So a shoe that may be comfortable at one point may not be another, and that's okay. Bodies do change over time. And I'm finding the same thing where what I used to like doesn't always fly, even if it's the same easy day run. So not too long ago, I loved an insane amount of flexibility. I was the minimalist guy. I wanted less stack height. I wanted no toe spring. I hated toe spring, and I always talked crap about it. But now I'm going, you know what? Depending on some days where my feet are beat up, I do want some of that. I just want to get rolled forward. Like, as Kofuzi said, just take the wheel. Just get me through this run. And so it depends. And it really depends on how my body's feeling and what I've done beforehand. And I think I typically right now, having adapted to a lot of the Maxwell stuff, just as you mentioned, like we're getting used to some of these shoes where now some of the more rocker rides are like, it's fairly normal. Like, what else you got? So probably a moderate amount of both flexibility and rigidity, like somewhere right in the middle is where I prefer right now for most easy runs. I want something that has a little bit of flexibility. My toe flexors aren't as used to minimalist stuff, so when I get something super flexible, I'm like, I hope I can get through this run. But for those faster runs, I'm having the same thing where depending on the speed and the pace of the day, kind of varies. Sometimes I want something that's super rigid and snappy, and other days I'm like, dude, just give me something flexible so I can get through this like threshold or tempo effort. So classic PT answer is it depends. But I'm finding that the further I go on, I'm like, there's some minute things that I'm trying to figure out, like, why am I preferring such a different thing every day? Maybe it's because I'm spoiled and we get tons of shoes, and maybe that's it. But it's a good question. I don't have a full answer. It really depends.
Yeah, it's all good. I don't know if I do either. I think as far as I'm over here typing notes on the side, like trying to plan my answer out. But as basically what I look at is I try to categorize like what type of run am I doing and what's the purpose, kind of like what you alluded to, Mike, like what's the purpose of this shoe? How can it best suit me for what I'm trying to use it for? And from what I've found for just daily miles, I have found that I like kind of a balanced ride, moderate flexibility, maybe a little bit more cushion underfoot because most of the time I'm recovering from a harder workout that I may have done the day before. That tends to be kind of what I lean for, kind of like straight down the middle of the line. You know what I mean? Like moderate everything pretty much. When I look at something for, say, a long run, give me that rocker. I actually really like getting into a rhythm and just flowing. So Carbon X2 from Hoka, CTM Ultra Carbon 2, today the Evo ride, that kind of firmer forefoot, even though it's non-plated, where I can just kind of rotate through and roll through. The racing shoes, I kind of depend too. I feel like if it's half marathon, I do kind of like that high stack, responsive foam rockered feel, but I also really like quick transitions through the midfoot and forefoot. So I actually like a little bit more of an aggressive shoe for racing purposes. And I think what's really ironic about this is when I go down in distance, I like it less aggressive. I kind of like to have me do it. Have you noticed that? Like all the shoes that I like when I'm running fast on the track, or like, because I talk to them about this stuff all the time, Matt and Nathan and them. Like I like the Deviate Nitro Elite for like 5K type works, even though it's a less aggressive shoe overall. The Takumi Sen, not as sharp of a rocker, a little bit lower, a little bit more of a flexible forefoot. I kind of like to be the one putting the work down. So it's interesting, right? Like just finding the different roles within the shoe and how can you best apply it to yourself and for the uses. So I think it's very interesting to just take a look and find your own unique characteristics, your own biomechanics, and how things feel fit for you and to go through. And I think that was a beautiful segment right there because you have three people that have all run in a very large amount of shoes at this point, and we all have our own different unique characteristics and interests in different shoes and for what we want them for. So I think it's just awesome. Anything you guys would like to add to that?
No, I'm good.
I'm good. I think it was pretty well said. I'm going to, again, emphasize that everybody's going to be a little bit different, and that's why I always, finding out and learning what works best for you, I think, Kofuzi, you mentioned that there's a learning process. You're adapting, right? We talk about. I'm glad to hear you say that because we always were wondering, like, are we getting used to this stuff? Like, if we went back to like 2000 and ran in some of this footwear that we ran in then, like, I have these very distinct memories of some of those shoes. If we put on that pair right now, would I have the same perception of that or not? Have you run it? I
don't think you would.
I've had that.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, nostalgia is the softest midsole. Like you're not going to like the same shoes in the same way. Like the Clifton 1 re-release, I think is a prime example. Like I hadn't run in any Cliftons before, and then the Clifton 1 re-release was my first Clifton ever. Yeah. And I bought that shoe and I'm running in it. And I'm like, I don't get it, guys. I don't get it. And people are like, oh, well, it was different when it came out the first year. I'm like, Hoka said this was the exact same tooling, the exact same formula. They said it was the exact same shoe. The brand that made it, they were like, this is the same. And you're telling me no, it was better before? I'm like, no, you just remember it different. You know, remember, nostalgia goes a long way in how you remember a shoe. Like one of my favorite shoes is like the Peg 34. I guarantee if I got like got fresh like old dead stock of the Peg 34 and it was like temperature controlled and in perfect condition, I could ride in it now. I'd be like, you know, it needs a little bit more under the forefoot. I'm sure I'd say something to complain about it, you know.
We even though push.
Yeah, I had like four. I had like four. Though I probably ran like 1,500 miles in that shoe. That not the same one, but like all of the different models that I had. Like I love that shoe, and I'm guarantee if I ran it now, I'd be like, this is not good. I don't like this.
I am people may know I'm an avid eBay hunter, and so one of my favorite shoes from high school, college was the New Balance 904, and I loved that shoe. It was like a mild stability, like lightweight trainer. It was perfect. And I found a pair, and somebody had kept it dead stock, and it was great. It was perfect, beautiful. I put it on. I'm like, this sucks. Like, where was all my memories? Like, I feel like it just shattered my view, and I was like, okay, maybe it's the foam degradation. Maybe it's that. I'm like, no, I think we got
things advance. They innovate. They adapt.
Like, you were saying too, though, like what you want, what you want, what you like also changes too. Yeah. So like you're different, and like the state of the art is different, you know, and like just I think as like a running culture, our preferences changed over the period of years, and so what's good now is that's why I feel like when you look back at shoes, like historically, even like when you look at, we're talking about Hoka, like when they came out with those like super thick, like basically double stuffed, they just took another shoe, cut off the midsole and then taped it to another shoe. Like what they were doing in the context of everything else that was going on, which was like bonkers idea, and they did it and it worked, you know? And so like, I just think that like comparing things to where the rest of the mindset is at the time, I think is also like pretty wild to think about when you look back at the history.
It is pretty cool. Can you imagine if somebody introduced the Prime X back then? That was like blowing their mind. Like,
you know what though? It wouldn't have been illegal though if it came out like 3 years ago. So like you totally could have raced. You could have raced and won marathons in the shoe. Now you can't because of rules.
Now you cannot. I was the comment, this is totally off topic, but seeing Ben Johnson race in the Super Comp trainer, and he's like, illegal, but I'm also not a pro runner, so don't care.
Yeah,
like,
so who cares?
Awesome. Yeah. That's the big thing. I think we often get caught up in some of like the elite stuff and all this stuff, but again, the majority of the population, the rest, you know, those of us who are mortals, right? Stuff is fine, right? You know, don't.
Yeah, it's
totally, like,
you know, racing in the Prime X for a non-elite runner is as illegal as like having your partner hand you an extra water bottle during your marathon.
Right,
which everybody does, right? And so it's like, you know, that's also technically illegal because you're getting assistance off course, you know, from someone. You know, running with headphones also illegal, you know. So it's just like, you know, we're not elites, we're out here having fun. That being said, I probably wouldn't race a marathon in the Prime X.
No, I would not. I've never been so tired after 6 miles when I ran in that shoe. I was like,
the thing is, I love it. The thing is, I love it. I've done like 22 miles in it, and I feel fresh. As fresh as a person can be. But like, I love that shoe. I just still won't race in it because it's technically illegal, you know. So I guess I wouldn't.
I just can't handle it. Like for whatever reason, it's so unstable. Well, that's just me too. I was so sore after running in that shoe, which is a different reason, right? Well, it's super protective, but you got to stabilize. That's a whole nother conversation.
Oh yeah, man, my ankles were sore after the Prime X.
Like,
shout out Adidas for breaking my ankles and giving the people what they want.
There you go.
You said more cush, we're gonna give it to you. Here,
but I really liked the ride. It was a very fun shoe to run in. Like with that said.
Yeah, I've been saving it because, you know, like normally I get rid of a shoe at 100 miles. I've been like, it's at 90 and I'm like, I'm going to wait because I'm like, there's a day that I'm going to be like, I need that shoe, and that's going to be the day, and that'll be like kind of my last run in it. I wanted to run it in today, and I was like, no, today's not the day. I'm going to save it for another day. Until I know that there's going to be a Prime X 2. Yeah. Unless there's going to be another one, you know.
Throw it out, yeah.
Then I'll run in this one, and then I'll make another review. But like, until then, I'm kind of like saving it.
Is there a reason you only go to 100 miles? Is that just for review purposes, or is there another reason there?
It's for review purposes. So like I get to 100 and then I don't have enough space to store shoes. So like then I'll do kind of a long-term review and then I donate the shoe to charity to get it out of my house.
That's
So
totally understandable.
yeah, I'm really hoping that there's like someone who's like some kid in cross country whose mom has figured out, like if you go to the Goodwill on Clybourne here in Chicago, like that's where to get the race shoes from.
That's where it's at.
You know, I'm hoping
Goodwill on Clybourne. You heard it here.
You know. But that's where I usually that's Salvation Army on Clybourne. That's where I take them. Although I don't know that they stay there, but that's where I take them.
That's a good point. Yeah, like you donate
great.
these shoes, and then like where does it actually go from there? I guess we'll never know. But that was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, Mike. Like,
Well, thanks so much for having me. Time flew by. I had a fantastic time, like nerding out about shoes. So.
Oh yeah, and we
awesome.
could go for hours more. Like like. But I mean, we all have lives, and you're on you're 2 hours ahead, 2 or 3.
Yeah,
2.
I'm Central Time.
Okay. Yeah, so we want to make sure we respect your time as well, and thank you so much for coming on. And a dad, yeah. So we'll let you get back to your life, but thank you again for coming on. For the listeners, for the viewers, for the people that are tuning in, thank you for tuning into the Doctors of Running Virtual Roundtable. We do our best to keep providing good content about the art and science of the stuff that we're putting on our feet. We're pretty much on every platform possible. If you haven't, I'm sure if you're following us, you're following Mike. But if you're not following Mike, he goes by Kofuzi on social media handles, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or other platforms. Both of us, both parties, we're all on different social handles as well. We're at Doctors of Running, and you can follow us there. But again, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And Mike, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So we'll end it there. And we'll see ya.